problem is, if you can't regulate this and you can't write it down, you have to figure out how to improve teacher quality. And it's hard when you write a new education act to just say, you have to be a good teacher to teach in our schools. It doesn't take you very far. And it's hard to just write down that we have to have good quality teachers. So the way I think about this is having other institutions and structures of the schools that create incentives for teachers to have good, for schools to have good teachers, to push us toward having better teachers. I mean, I think teachers are the answer, but we have to work through other kinds of policies if we're going to get to good teachers. So here's where the evidence from international work comes in. If we look across places that have centralized exams, we find that countries and school systems that tend to have centralized exams that measure performance do better. Which, if you eliminate the word education and you talk about how in order to manage your firm, you have to have some measure of performance. Oops, I'm not sure that I know how to update my software. If you go to some firm in the economy and sort of say, you know, you probably can do a better job if you know how you're doing, it wouldn't surprise most people, right? But you go to schools and it surprises people when you say, in order to make better decisions, we have to know how the students are doing. That's the evidence that comes across. And we have lots of examples, without getting too close to home here, of school systems that are run without much evidence about the outcomes of the school. Schools that use exam informations for accountability, the systems that do that tend to do better. And this largely comes from cross-country evidence, although there's now a growing evidence, at least in the United States, where we've had very extensive test-based accountability systems, that having these systems improves performance. Now, that's not to say that we know how exactly to do it. No Child Left Behind has been very controversial in the United States, where the federal government declared that you had to have test-based accountability systems in all the states. And in fact, it's not a very good accountability system from my judgment. The rules behind it aren't very good. At the same time, students have done better after introducing this accountability system than before, so that even a bad accountability system seems to have some benefits. We also find that allowing more local decision-making is beneficial in general. And I'm going to give you a little evidence here that's I don't know if I can, let me see if I can. Do I have to accept?
No, just close it.
Okay. I was starting to get too close to the update here, but I thought I should take care of it. We've been doing some recent work, and that allowing decisions at local schools seems to be beneficial. But here's an obvious place where we have to think more deeply about how we do it. When you think about allowing local decisions at the school level, the benefits come from the fact that people on the ground know what the demands are for their kids. Kids differ in lots of schools. And they also know the capacity of the school. You just can't assume that all schools are ready to make these decisions and so forth. So that's the argument behind it. But there's a real tension, because if I just say to the local school, do what you want, try to do good in schools and do whatever you want, there's a possibility that the local school will do things that aren't very good or aren't very good for the kids. We were talking before, if you go to Mexico, one of the things that local schools do is allow the teachers to give their job to anybody they want, or sell their job, actually. And you could take your teaching job and give it to your third cousin, regardless of whether your third cousin knows anything about teaching or can even speak the Spanish language. And so you see this tension. And what we find is there are going to be huge advantages to, if you have autonomy, to also have an accountability system that records whether the people are doing what you want and maybe can use it. Now, when we look across countries, as Ludger Woosman and I have done, this is some research that has looked at all of the countries that are participated in PISA over the period 2000 to 2009, so that there are 4 different administrations of PISA. And what we've done here in the background is to look at some countries have allowed for more autonomous decision making, and others have insisted on more centralized decision making over time. And we've tried to ask the question, if you change your views on how much local decision making there should be, do you see changes in the performance on PISA? Now, this is really autonomous decision making about curriculum and textbooks and the actual materials. You can think of having decisions about salaries locally and so forth. One of the things we found here, by the way, which leads to the suggestion that you need your own vibrant research community, is that the results differ by how developed the country is. This is in terms of, we've measured development for this purpose in terms of what was GDP per capita in 2000, at the beginning of the period. And what you find is that the more developed countries get more gains from allowing local decision making. As you get to less developed countries, you're hurting. Spain on this picture is below the 0 point, right? What this is what happens if you allow local decision making with no accountability and no exit exams to measure performance. What you find is that if you added in information about exit exams, it would just shift this curve up. It says you get a lot more out of local decision making if you have exit exams. And in fact, the curve would cross the axis at about $5,000 in GDP per capita, which would mean, shift this whole curve up, Spain is up here, that says more local decision making if you can record what the students are doing, looks like, by international evidence, to be a very beneficial thing. But maybe just allowing people to make their own decisions without keeping track of what they're doing might not be a good decision. That's what this picture is saying. And it's also saying another thing that that's outside of this talk, but it's sort of saying the World Bank and other development agencies likes to take information from studies in the U.S. and take them to developing countries. And this says, well, maybe we should be a little careful about that, because you might not get the same results just going to developing countries. In this list of things that we've been finding from international studies, we find that allowing more parental options and choice in where their children go to schools is beneficial. And then What you might have guessed from when I talked about teacher quality, direct performance incentives seem to matter. Countries and school systems that more directly relate incentives for teachers and administrators to student performance do better. Now, I put off one of the more controversial slides that I give in the U.S. to this point to talk about direct performance incentives. In the United States, we've been able to follow student growth across grades and teachers and relate it to individual teachers. And what this has been called recently is value-added analysis. So I can statistically get a measure of teacher effectiveness related to how much gains in achievement come from this teacher over time. And we find that there's a very wide difference between some teachers and other teachers. One study that I did in a very low-income area was looking across the teachers in the schools. There were some teachers in those schools that got 1.5 years of learning each year of schooling. They got their kids moving faster than the expected learning each grade. There was another group of teachers in the same schools that got half of a year of learning growth each year. So that in one school year, some kids were getting a full more year of learning just by virtue of what classroom they were assigned to. So it doesn't take much to think that this can really change the lives of students, depending upon this. So now let me do the following experiment, and I'm going to come back to the very first picture of the PISA scores. I'm going to take the information we have now about just how much difference is there typically between teachers in the schools, and I'm going to think of lining up every teacher, all 3.5 million teachers in the United States, in a single line by how effective they are. And then I'm going to do the following experiment. What would happen if I took the bottom 2% of those teachers and replaced them with an average teacher? Not a star, but just an average teacher. Or the bottom 4%. What does the evidence say that that would do to achievement?